He's been bloviating about that. They said nothing about it. Instead, they talked about everything from woke culture to cancer culture to abortion rights and all of this other stuff. But that wasn't going to win the election.
ESPN host Stephen A. Smith says that he has no choice but to run for president of the United States. John Iadarola and J.R. Jackson of the Damage Report broke all this down. We're going to take a look at clips of John and J.R. as well as Stephen A. Smith. I have some thoughts to share on this too. Let's check it out together.
Are you really thinking about running for president? Is this something you think?
Listen, I've been. I have no choice because I've had elected officials, and I'm not going to give their names, elected officials coming up to me. I've had folks who are pundits come up to me. I've had folks that got a lot of money, billionaires and others, and have talked to me about exploratory committees and things of that nature. I'm not a politician. I've never had a desire to be a politician. But here's the reality. People have walked up to me, including my own pastor, for crying out loud, who has said to me, you don't know what God has planned for you. At least show the respect to the people who believe in you, who respect you, who believe that you can make a difference in this country, to leave the door open for any possibilities 2 to 3 years down the line.
So that is, of course, Stephen A. Smith saying what could be true, that all of these people are just constantly running up to him and telling him that he needs to run for president. I could potentially see that. He's got a big fan base. And I would just say, you do always have a choice whether you run for president or not. Nobody's actually forced to run for president. Some would say it's actually a very difficult thing to do. So you have more of a choice in that than you have in maybe anything else in the world. But okay, he's convinced he doesn't necessarily have a choice. Now, it's a long way to go until 2028. You could throw out feelers like this. Who's to say how serious it is? He has been put into some of the polling, albeit very early, and they found him at about 2% support, which might seem very low, but he isn't a politician. I mean, that still puts him like just right behind Tim Walz, who was the VP nominee not too long ago. It puts him not that far behind Josh Shapiro, by the way. Now, there are some other candidates that are a little bit higher. AOC at 6, Newsom at 7, and Harris is still leading, obviously, by a lot. But that said, I'm not super familiar with the work of Stephen A. Smith. JR, I absorb a little bit of him from headlines and stuff like that. How seriously do you take this? And what do you think about him sort of trying to generate some enthusiasm about
0%. 0%. Less chance of him doing it than the polling showed right there. I mean, the problem is sorry, but in this particular world, the reason you were looking forward, from my point of view, to be honest, because I know who Stephen A. Smith is, because I've watched a lot of sports and analysts and ESPN guys and talkers and NBA basketball and all that stuff. That's where his wheelhouse is. First Take, I used to watch that show all the time. So that's why. But that's not enough name recognition to get you anywhere in political circles or in this political life. Yeah, sure, social media blows him up more, so people may even recognize his face, but they have no reason to then think. So in the most turbulent time in this, at least in the current nature of our country, from folks who are alive right now, some of the most turbulent times that we're seeing upcoming with a complete change of our entire democracy, enough people are gonna wanna trust in Stephen A. Smith, who just said, I have no idea what the hell I'd be doing. Why would that be the case? And that's no shot on him. He's saying those things in a way that are supposed to be like, I don't think I know everything. So he's not being boisterous or big-headed and egotistical in this particular case. He usually is, but not in this particular case. So it's just saying it because maybe it's fun to, maybe like anyone else. I always like to look behind the scenes because I feel like people promote themselves in any kind of way they can these days. And he doesn't need any promotion. He makes plenty of money. He's completely recognizable in the circles that he's recognizable in. But people just kind of never want to end expanding their reach. So I wonder if it's to that point. I'm sure people have said something like that to him because he floated it in joking, and he's talked to Sean Hannity all the time. So in floating it, it's probably fun to hear that from people. So he's probably just kind of jazzed within himself, which I don't blame him. Be jazzed, but I don't think he really thinks this is going to be real.
I guess it probably feels good to be told you should run for president. And he has fans, in sports. I know some people in the chat are like, is it a good sign for his candidacy if his appeal is to jocks, and if a jock like John isn't familiar with him? But I would remind everyone, I know that I exude so much jockery that you think I've always been a jock, but it is pretty new. So I wouldn't have that reflect too poorly on Stephen A. Smith. But anyway, let's go to just a little bit of him talking about what he'd be like as a candidate, and then maybe we can set this aside for like 2 years, but we'll see.
Before we get into this next part, so J.R. Jackson talks about the name recognition. And we're in a kind of dangerous period where we have Donald Trump, who was completely unqualified, but he was a really famous guy that everybody knew. And that was his ticket to get in. And now we're going to have other famous people who are completely unqualified. Even Stephen A. Smith admits he's unqualified. We're going to have other famous people who are going to be trying to get in there just based on their name recognition and their fame. And he says he never had any interest in being a politician. You don't want somebody like that running for president. You want somebody who wants to be president running. I mean, that should just be the first point that you would look at in all of this. But it seems to me like Stephen A. Smith is just a delusional guy who is well known, and, you know, people coming up to you on the street saying how much they like you and that you should run for president does not equate to actually being able to make a serious run.
See, let's jump into this.
They talk, but what can they do? They position themselves to do absolutely nothing. I didn't hear anything about terrorists from the Democrats before the election. Trump had been preaching about this for the longest time. The way people decry his strategy, he's been bloviating about that. They said nothing about it. Instead, they talked about everything from woke culture to cancer culture to abortion rights and all of this other stuff. But that wasn't going to win the election. And that's what we have to look at. What is it going to take to get the job done? That's why somebody who's a sports analyst, for crying out loud, is in the daggone polls. It's not somebody big up in me. It's an indictment against a Democratic Party that doesn't have leadership and doesn't have a vision. And it's sad.
Okay, I kind of agree that it is an indictment of the Democratic Party. Again, you're pushing the idea. Like that's what you can do that. By the way, you're allowed to do that. But like when you go on a bunch of shows and you're talking about you running for president, you're not. Your arm is not necessarily being twisted. Let's be clear about that. But that said, it is still an indictment, the fact that it generates so much enthusiasm. Now, you can have things like that. Like every once in a while, people talk about like Jon Stewart. What if he were to run? Or, you know, what if Arnold Schwarzenegger ran? Or, you know, I don't know. But he doesn't seem to hate the idea, JR.
Exactly. I mean, this is another thing,
he's
bro.
not giving off a vibe that like, oh, I'd hate it if I had to run for president.
Every time he goes into details about it, shows you why he wouldn't make it, even if he has an opportunity to even have a voice in any of these primaries. Yeah. So his breakdown of what the Democratic platform was didn't make full sense. So the way he blew off things like abortion rights, like humans having autonomy over their bodies, is just whatever. Bro, you're already done. You're already done in the primary. So stop. That. Just stop. You're already done. So it's like his sports takes, which of course work in sports because, you know, it's sports. But it doesn't work when you're talking about representing people. He doesn't know how to do that, it seems. I don't know Stephen A. Smith, but I'm talking about what he presents publicly. It's not something that people want to get behind and feel like you can speak for them or you represent their beliefs, because you just blew off a lot of people's beliefs and representations as just whatever. Yeah. That's not gonna work, bro. You at least have to fake it, like most Democrats do, to fake the idea that they actually believe in people's abortion rights. So he threw that in with cancel culture and wokeism, whatever else he said. It's no way to actually talk if you want to get support. He'd lose it before he got it.
And he unless I was mishearing, he was like, they talked about woke culture and cancel culture. Like the Democrats, first of all, no, they didn't. The Republicans did. Like, what a misreading of the way that, and like you're saying that they talked about it, like, you know, Democrats talk woke culture or what? Yeah. No.
And in terms of J.R. Jackson and John Iadarola talking about Stephen A. Smith's views on policy, this is the whole key. He goes on with Bill Maher and they both whine about how everything is woke and I don't like woke. And if you want to have real criticisms of the Democratic Party, I'm here for it. They didn't have a clear economic vision in the last campaign with Kamala Harris. They should be running on Bernie Sanders' policies of raising taxes on the rich, going after the oligarchs, raising taxes on corporations, trying to benefit regular people instead of the super rich. But Stephen A. Smith doesn't want to hear that because he's one of the rich. So he's going to rail against woke, which woke is basically anything Stephen A. Smith doesn't like is woke. That's not a winning strategy. That's not a winning policy. I if he would make an actual run, which he's not going to, I would suspect that he is not going to support Bernie Sanders or AOC's ideas, which I believe are winning strategies that the Democratic establishment should be taking on instead of worrying about quote unquote woke. But let me know what you think about all this. Do you agree with what John Iadarola and J.R. Jackson said? Do you think that Stephen A. Smith will make an actual real run, or is he just delusional and this is just all talk? Let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. I'm Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.